Do you want to give us kind of a bit more of a definition around EcoCommerce and your NCU credit that you've created?
So when I wrote my first book, it dealt with a lot of using the metrics that we're very familiar with today. There's 1,000 metrics out there for various things. And a gentleman in Sweden read the book and gave me a call, and he said, Tim, I'm working in Africa, and I'm working with farmers that are running 4 hectares and 40,000 hectares. He goes, and I'm trying to develop an eco. And at the time, I was really accounting for these ecosystem services on a field-by-field basis, my 80-acre L-shaped field and the neighbors, whatever. And I realized someone in the financial business doesn't care the size of my field or doesn't even want to know it. And that's when this natural capital unit came to my mind. It's like, why don't we make a uniform unit, not a metric, but an accounting unit that I could grid the planet with, and each one of those would have a unique characteristic, but you would geospatially know where it's at. And the analogy I use there is 200-300 years ago, people were selling grain in wagon loads and buckets and boxes and you name it. And someone came along and said, we need to get a bushel basket, a standardized unit that you can put these grains in. And I'm sure they said, well, we don't need that because we're already selling grain today. But what they did maybe realize is that the bushel is responsible for organizing global trade. If you take the bushel away, the global grain collapses. And if you put it back in, it reorganizes itself. There's this miraculous, simple, little arbitrary concept of having a uniform, arbitrary accounting unit. And whether there's oats go in there that's 32 pounds or corn that's 56 pounds, we need a standardized, arbitrary unit. It took agriculture several thousands of years to decide on the bushel basket because you have to really listen to the market, what it needs. So we've been trading ecosystem services for 2 decades, and I've been listening to it. So I created this natural capital unit and really proposed it to be cyber-physical, geospatial bushel basket for the 21st century. Okay, so who gets to decide what that is? Well, one that comes forward with the best idea, it makes sense. The bushel basket's fairly simple, just a void of certain cubic feet, and the NCU that becomes a digital space. If you think of a bushel basket as a single space to put data in, the NCU, I looked at it as 4 layers. The farm is a factory. We have energy, incoming energy, sun and solar, so that's one piece of natural capital. We have the biological processes, soil, pollination, and those things. So that's kind of like the conveyor belts of a factory. And then you have the geophysical resources, which are the foundation. And what those 3 things create is the outputs, whatever product you have, corn, timber, and all that. Well, of those 4 layers, the only one that isn't accounted for in the economic system is those bioprocesses, the pollination, this carbon sequestration, all those items. And so really what the NCU does is identify the 4 layers of natural capital that really mimic a production system of a factory, and recognizes that 3rd layer, as I call it, bioprocesses are not really accounted for. So what this NCU does is allow for the natural capital data. So the data that you and I use on the farm all the time, soil, nutrients, weather, we have all that data already. And then we put our inputs in there, what we're going to plant, how much we're going to fertilize it. And that's really all the data anyone needs to create any metric output. Because I produce cultural, provisional, regulating, like bioprocess, on the same parcel of land, simultaneously using the same management regime, right? You don't have 2 management regimes on a single field. So I produce corn. The management I use to produce corn produces a certain amount of carbon sequestration, certain amount of water quality. So what the NCU does is organizes that natural capital data in one spot. It allows anyone to bring their metric in, pull the data they need to spit an outcome. The difference is right now, the market expects us to upload our data into all their accounting systems. So I send my data to these entities that want to pay for ecosystem services. My data goes into their accounting system. I'm not sure how secure it is. They govern it. and it's really out of date the next day because something's happened on our farm. So what I'm proposing is, why don't we create this NCU accounting system, geospatial, that every farmer can have their piece of that puzzle, that their accounting system, and then let anyone into it that they want. So we either have one accounting system or 10,000. And the reason why we have 10,000 now is because no one's proposed a single one. And the entities that are demanding it, General Mills or whoever, they're just trying to solve their problem, not the problem. And the problem is we don't have a singular accounting system. So that's really the idea, is how do we get over that hump of developing an accounting system, a singular one, and then allow farmers to take their patch of that grid, and use that for the accounting system.
Yeah, and absolutely, I agree with that. Especially that point around everyone's just trying to solve their own problem, and then they try to retrofit that to solve other people's problems. I guess the problem is, how do we integrate this into these systems that are already out there?